Today's discussion is titled Pivoting Transgenerational Enterprises. It's my pleasure to introduce your moderator for the session, G. Vijayaraghavan. GVR, as he's popularly known, is Director of VMA Consultants and has played a critical role in heralding the Indian IT industry. As a member of the Board of Directors in Suntech Business Solutions, Chairman of UST Global, Director for Center for Autism and Other Disabilities Rehabilitation Research and Education, CADA for short. He plays key roles in the strategy and direction that these premier institutions take. He's also the former director of National Institute for Speech and Hearing at Trivandrum, which is being raised to the level of a national university by Government of India. And as all of us know, he's also the founder, CEO of Technopark, which continues to be one of the best technology centers in India and has the record of having the highest generation of economic activity and employment per unit of geographical area, as well as the highest concentration of FDI. As a key contributor to CII, NASSCOM, Inc., and of course, as TIE Kerala Charter member, he also mentors and works closely with startups and businesses to help them make sense of the world of technology. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Revati. I know we have a good group of people who are on this call. Excellent programs that TIE has organized over the last couple of days, and we are the last session before the final program of the day. And I think Ajit and Hari and the team, they probably looked at bringing together what I would say one of the most marvelous family business that Kerala has, brought them together onto this panel. And this is something which really talks about, especially for a lot of people who are starting off into businesses, this is going to be a lot of inputs which could come in terms of how they move from one generation to the other. On this call, you have two generations. You have Aju Jacob. He's been with the Synthite since 1987. Director of Operations, Strategic Growth Area, and New Product Development. He's a chemical engineer from Bangalore University and did his post-graduation from Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. You have Paolo George, who has completed his engineering graduation from PSG College of Technology, Coimbatore, and done his post-graduation in engineering business management from Warwick University in the UK. Before which he worked with their own company, which is Symega Food Ingredients in 2007. And so before that, he did his master's there. And of course, he's worked with Infosys and Aramco Limited in the UK. We'll talk about his company as we get to him. And you have Ashok Mani, who studied who did his education at the Southern Methodist University with a specialization in finance and economics. He worked in the US and then came to India. He was in India with Synthite in Delhi. And now, for the last several years, he's part of the group. I'm going to start with Aju, who is, I would say, the elder generation in this. Okay, I mean, they are all very young people when you look at them, but he's what I would say the elder generation. And I think the other two would be calling him an uncle at home. And I don't know what they call him, maybe Aju in the office. But one of the things is, Mr. C.V. Jacob, okay, who founded Synthite, I think it was in 1972 that he founded Synthite. They today have the Synthite Industries, which is I would say the mother company, which is into spice extracts, spice, health and wellness. Symega, which is into products, flavors, and seasoning, and Intergrow. So I think Symega, Paolo is part of that, and Intergrow is where Ashok is. That the other company is there. How is this? How did you all move? I know that George Paul was involved with Synthite. How did you all move so smoothly from one generation to the next? Okay, because if you really look at it today, you have the third generation who are in the business. You've got large business houses in the country where, the second generation brothers themselves fight, go to court and things like that. I'm not giving names, but how was this managed, and what are the lessons that others who are founders today, whether they are young or, I know Mr. C.V. Jacob got into this business quite later in life, but how is it that you all manage that, and what was it that you put in place to get this become so smooth?
When my dad started the business in 1972, he had two of his nephews with him who started along, or actually, since we were all young, he had two of his nephews with him, George Paul and Mr. C.J. George. And both me and my brother, before that, my two brothers-in-law got into business sometime in, I think, 82, 83. My brother joined in 86, I joined in 87. Early itself, during that time, honestly, we had a small challenge. We had a small issue. One of the nephews wanted to part ways and be on his own, which did happen, which actually was, on the hindsight, something that happened, which made us learn a lot about, how we should manage better going forward. So that became two businesses. And since then, we have all stayed together. My dad's, our family, and also George Paul's family have stayed together and grown the business from 87 till date. And I would say in the mid 2000, when as the business was growing, slowly we were looking at the next generation. Even prior to that, there were small issues within the family, but we were able to manage that because we were the first and second generation. We also were already 20 years in the business by then. But as we started seeing the next generation, the third generation, current generation of Paolo and Ashok slowly coming in, actually Paulo's cousin, Joseph John, was the first to join the business from the third generation. He runs our realty business. So once that started, again, we didn't have many processes in place. So we did see some challenges, initially because of the lack of process to get the third generation of the business. That actually called for everyone to look at what we should be doing. And that actually, eventually in 2012, we felt that we need a family business coach to help us do that, somebody to facilitate, to create a structure. And through that process, we came out pretty good. We eventually, in about a year and a half, about 18 months, it took for us to have the various discussions, create a family council, various processes that are required for a system to be put in place. One of the things that we were very clear in the beginning is that it's our family, so we should look at what we need for our family. So we didn't want to copy some structure from elsewhere. So that's why it probably took 18 months, because the facilitator was going back and forth with the board members, with the family who are not in the business, the children who were aspiring to come. The third generation also was very actively connected or discussing with them also on what their aspirations were. So through that 18 months, by the end of it, what we call a blue book was established, where, even for us, like prior to that, we also didn't have, we had roles, but then the clarity was not there. So we brought in clarity. A transition happened from C.V. Jacob to George Paul, moving in as managing director, and C.V. Jacob only as a chairman. And subsequently, also the subsequent transition also was clearly laid out. So all those processes help us to have a good structure in place. Specifically, since we are talking about third generation, very clearly laid out how a third generation can be drafted in. A couple of things I would like to explain there is, one was that undergraduate who, after finishing studies, anybody wanting to join business, and maybe Ashok and Paolo did not go through that process, but subsequently whoever joined had to minimum work 2 years outside the business. And once they come in, they have to do a 2 years of training at first year at various portfolios, and then an outstation business. So after that process was established, and then they could work in any specific part of the business under a professional, and then eventually look at they growing in the business as they feel the opportunity is. And if you look at today, Paolo, again, I'm quoting them because they're here, they both run specific parts of the businesses. So they're leaders in their own rights, leading businesses. So we have two other family members, Joseph John and also Jacob Nine, and both are also leading businesses. So of the 8 third generation in the business, 4 of them are in controlling business or heads of businesses in their own rights. The other 4 are in the system working under professionals. and they also have a clear path going forward. And we also have done one thing that if you look at the total siblings of this generation, we have 16 of them, but only 8 are in the business. We have also consciously discussed that we will not have more than 8 for that, because the businesses can only accommodate, because we also need good professionals to be part of the business. Yeah.
I'll get back to you on the question, but I have Paolo, just to when you look at this, how do you this is a very tricky thing which comes up when you have relatives in a company, all right? And you have Aju, I heard you call him uncle the other day. All right, how do you handle issues when there is a matter of, I don't want to use the word conflict, but there is a debate going on a decision to be taken, and you're discussing it out. And at that point of time, are you able to set aside from your mind that family relationship and look at it purely as a professional, and you are talking in the interest of the business, he's talking in the interest of the business? Is that something which is possible, or do you lose tempers at some point of time? I'm not saying that happens, but is there anything like that? And if that happens, how do you handle it? Because you're heading one business.
Yes, I think that's a pretty tough opening question, but I'll take it. I think the answer definitely is that we're all while we're related by family and we're connected by business. I think at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We all have our own we bring our emotions to the table as much as logic and reason. But I think overall, I think it's the logical, rational case is almost always heard out. So in a specific case, for example, if there's a proposal, and usually that's what happens when we are leading our own businesses, we'll have certain proposals for our business, which we wish to take up with the senior management or the supervisory board. What perhaps I did wrong in the early days was that I used to go straight to the board and make my case. And sometimes I think in hindsight, I realize that it's probably better to go one-to-one. The reason for that is not strategic, but purely because it gives everybody an opportunity. If the proposal is big enough and it's complicated enough, it helps both. It helps both the senior, my uncles, my father when he was part of the business. With each of them, a one-to-one was actually great learning for us, because we would be able to hear from their experience, what perspective they find interesting and concerning. And therefore, when I now, and my, Ashok and all of us from the third generation now, when we present, I think we are a bit more confident, because we've kind of seen all, or thought through most of the points. And then the board discussion therefore becomes strategic, where you're not out there, it's the no surprise rule. There are no surprises now in terms of what you're proposing. More importantly, it becomes strategic in terms of, how can we get wherever we are trying to go faster. I know it sounds poetic when I say it. It's not been smooth sailing, but I think it's par for the course. So that's basically what I've learned over the years, especially when you are the next generation in the business. Even if you have, I think in a sense, we've been lucky because we have had our own independent businesses to run. We have had our own, set of trouble. But it's also been very exciting because it's been new for us as well as for our, for the senior management. Whereas I think one challenge which would have been there if we were part of the existing business is there would have been a lot of, let me tell you what you need to do. Whereas in many of us who were leading our own businesses, we kind of could lean on to them. So, I think credit to them for trusting us with such responsibilities.
A quick question here. Did, Symega, you started that off? Were you initially part of starting it off? And if that was the case, how was that something which you were able to get in? Because this is something which everyone will, because in a way, you have diversified, but when I look at what you've done, you've not gone beyond what I would say that court which has been drawn in terms of your businesses. So, Paolo, if you can tell how you put up your case, and then I'm going to, before I come to Ashok, I'll go back to Aju to ask him how at that point of time, what I don't want to call him the elder, but the elders looked at that proposal.
Sure. So Symega itself is two companies which have merged together. So I'll try quickly to just give you a background because they have identical stories. In 2006, Synthite got into two joint ventures. One was with a British flavor company, and the other was with an Austrian seasoning company. I mean, for simplicity, let's say both were 50-50 joint ventures. So I was the person responsible for setting up the British one, the British joint venture. The background to that was actually the British company, Aramco, had actually reached out to Synthite in 2005 or thereabouts, asking them for their interest in setting up a similar joint venture in India, because they were struggling to sell their products in India. And Synthite was a supplier to Aramco in those days. I mean, they continue to be.
Yeah.
So the difference is, so you mentioned that we are in the same court, but just a slight difference. So the kind of business that Synthite does is the extracts and essential oils that go, which are largely used by flavor and fragrance houses. Whereas the business that Aramco and now Symega is into is being a flavor house ourselves. So we're kind of like we're like a captive customer, and also in double quotes, competitors to some of our parent company's main customers. So anyway, so that's how we set up the business. We had a very identical setup for another company with an Austrian company, which was actually called Symega, which actually joined together, and we merged. Today, they're both 100% owned companies of Synthite. We have acquired the stake of the foreign partners. And so then we decided to amalgamate them and make them a single company called Symega Food Ingredients. Today we do flavors, seasonings, natural colors, value-added products for the food industry. But to just circle back to your question in terms of how did it happen, so I think I was in the UK finishing my master's at Warwick. This is, I mean, you could call it serendipity, but that was the time when the British company came down, made a presentation to Synthite. The board felt that, if we need to pursue that business, and I credit to the board once again, they felt the need to value add their offerings, and they felt it would be nice for the company to get into that space. But they also felt that they wanted somebody to lead it from the Synthite side. I'm not sure what the discussion was. I'm sure Aju Uncle would be able to detail that out. But they felt that, because I was there, maybe I should, be given the opportunity. So I grabbed it. Yeah.
Good. So Aju, can you tell us the other part of the story?
Yeah. In fact, as Paolo mostly explained, the two joint ventures happened at the same time. In the Austrian one, Chris, who was the joint venture partner, he himself was part of the business to run it. So he took over that, or he was running it initially. And the other one, like Paolo was in UK finishing his studies, the JV was to happen. And definitely we had contemplated whether that to be part of the existing business or to be separate, because as Paolo said, it's a further value or forward value addition for Synthite. So we wanted to be a separate business, not within Synthite. And Paolo was finishing up, and when, as I told you earlier, Joseph John had already joined the business. So we felt that, to give one of the youngsters the opportunity to carry out something new that would also, give them a lot of, like I would say, support, in the sense that they get the opportunity to show their mettle. And, that is what we gave Paolo the opportunity. I wish we could do that even today with a lot of the other youngsters, but the business has not grown that big that we can give everybody the opportunity. But that was the main thought process. We were starting something new, forward value addition, very close to Synthite. So let one of the youngsters take responsibility and drive it. And that's how Paolo got that opportunity. And it all turned out to be good. So we have no regrets.
Good. Ashok, I know you must be the guy with the whole, or everyone in the family must be jealous about, correct? You get to move with all these film stars and all that. I mean, because I think yours is the one which is totally B2C kind of, working with consumers right through. Does Paolo's business have anything directly with consumers, or is it again B2B?
90% is B2B.
B2B. So you all, this was one part of the business where you moved from what I would say pure B2B into a B2C kind of a model. So Ashok, how was that change in terms of decisions being taken? One is, how did you get into the business would be one thing to say. And then how did that, because the B2B thought process and the B2C thought process, even at the board level, is completely different. How did you manage that? And also, if you could just respond by telling me, do you have a lot of common people among your boards, or is it completely different? Ashok, if you could respond to these 2-3 points.
Sure. Yeah. To answer your last point, at this point of time, we do have a board that's diverse. It started off with almost a very similar board to Synthite, or I'd rather say we were reporting into the Synthite board. But now with investors coming on board about a year from October last year, we've had a more diverse board come on board. It's not just a family board at this point. To answer you on your earlier questions of how do we go about into the space, I would say the B2C aspirations of Synthite were possibly much before even I came on board, right? But I guess as Paolo said and Mr. Ashok pointed out, it was more so a case of being available at the right time. So I started off my career with Synthite in Delhi with the marketing operations. A year later, I had the opportunity to move back into what Synthite then set up as SGA, or strategic growth areas, looking at both organic and inorganic opportunities. We did about 6 months of hardcore work into trying to figure out how to get into the FMCG space. So my task was more so to identify opportunities for M&A. I mean, I came from a little bit of a background of that with my college education and my time at Deloitte. We did spend a lot of time, but sadly we never got through. I mean, we were not able to make a deal through that period. But I would say at that particular point of time, with 7 months of intensive experience and studying, I possibly was the one with the most experience, as 7 months as little as it is, to say in the FMCG space, right? So, but the aspirations were very clear, right? I think the board were very clear that, we have to get into the FMCG category per se. Masala or curry powder was very low-hanging fruit. It is something that Synthite has been doing for the last 40-odd years in a B2B format. So that was the reason why we got into kitchen treasures to begin with. Challenges, I would say yes, as you rightly put it out, for a company that's historically been B2B, right? I mean, your history is always investing into asset and sweating the asset and continuously making profits. Now you are getting into a business where, like you said, as much as glamorous as it is, you end up paying those celebrities, right? So I mean, it's not something that you're clearly used to. So I guess that was the challenges in the earlier phase about spending, let's say, X crores on advertising is something that we're not used to. To say that you would have to incur losses on your books for, let's say, a 5-year window in the name of brand building, right? Something that you're not actually physically seeing was something that was a bit challenging. But I would say the board adapted very quickly. I would say it took possibly a year or two, but then the fact that you actually were able to build top lines, create that the talk and the buzz in the market was good enough. So I guess that's the advantage with working with family as well, right? I mean, the convincing happens soon enough than elsewhere.
And I asked you about the board level challenge. You did mention about spending so much on advertising and things like that. How were those handled? Was it like Paolo said, you went to each person of the board separately, and then you discussed, and then you went to the board after that? And I'm going to get back to Aju to find out how the board would have reacted at that time.
Yeah, so like Paolo said, I guess that too was a learning, right? I mean, we've all learned over the last 6-7 years is the way I'd put it. But yes, to start off with, I still am reporting into Aju and the board. So, but I did spend a lot of time with Mr. Aju directly kind of explaining as to why we have to do these investments. And, I mean, taking surrogates and kind of, sharing the learning experience, if I may call it that. So for me, the path was a bit different. I guess, the way to the board was also to get Mr. Aju on board in terms of understanding, and that was how we went about it.
Aju, how was that handled at that time?
I mean, as you rightly mentioned, moving from a B2B to B2C was a significant leap for Synthite. And again, we were also very fortunate till about 2014. Whatever we started, I think in the first year itself, we made profit. So we were not used to making losses in anything that we started new. So to see that, brand building is like a capital that we have to invest compared to building and structure that you would do in a brick and mortar business. So that's something, again, we are very new to. And also the limelight, because, a company that's making losses, but somebody who from the family is getting all the limelight. Of course, there were challenges internally. I mean, I'd rather be candid about it than hiding it. But what happened through the process, through 1 or 2 years, and as we started seeing visibility, because like I would say, Synthite since 72, but company that's doing well, we were known in the industrial circles, but not really beyond that. So this gave us more visibility into the community at the larger, even consumer. So that aspect people started to understand, and brand building is a cost that you had to have. Took a while. I mean, definitely, especially for my father, it was very, very difficult to initially get that concept right because of his past experiences. So, but Ashok, I think, was very convincing, or rather, he had the way with all of us in making sure that we continue to stay invested over the years. And today, it has, about 5 years into the business, the brand is established. He runs today and growing. So it, again, as I mentioned earlier, it eventually has turned out to be good because we did it in good faith.
I'm going to ask you, I'm just going to take you back in time. Because, a lot of people who are watching this program are the younger people. They would have heard of C.V. Jacob. They would have heard about how he was one of the first people to say, I'll make an investment in the Cochin airport. Okay. But can you just tell briefly about Mr. C.V. Jacob in terms of how he decided to get into this business? I know he was into some other business before that. Maybe briefly talk about that, at what age he got into it, and also the values which he put for your organization, which you all continue today also. It'll be good to talk about that because it's necessary for those who are on the program to understand how at a time when Kerala was not what I would call a place where people want to make an investment, how you all decided to do this in Kolanjeri.
No, my dad was in construction business when he started. He was school dropout, started with his father, and then was in construction till about 64. I think.
Used to do a lot of work for electricity board and all.
Yeah, he was mainly involved in the construction of dams and bridges. So he was mostly away from Kolanjeri during most of his early career. So then I think he was very determined that he should be back and very close to home in what he does next. And he decided to move into a chemical business with his brother and a friend of theirs who's a chemical engineer. That was in around 64. That continued to do well. And as things may, I keep saying this, connecting the dots, because he had one of his cousins living in the US send him a note saying that a lot of spices are being transported to US for process. The Central Food Research Institute in Mysore around the time had announced the technology that they have developed for isolation of oils and oleoresins from spices. And he also, around the time, I think in the 70s, he had visited, it's in 1970 in the Expo 70 in Japan, he had seen the liquid spices. So as Steve Jobs says, connecting these dots in 72, he and his brother took some spices, cardamom, pepper, and went all the way to Mysore to get it processed. They were very excited, signed a royalty agreement with the Central Food Research Institute, and started in a small way. And that's what has grown to what we are today. And one thing I don't know, something which I'm also amazed is the fact that he's able to sense an opportunity very, very early in when he's talking to. Sometimes when I'm sorry to say this, but more than visionary, when he saw that opportunity, that then he backed it 100%, and there is no delegation or anything. He will make sure that he is through and through with it. Even with the airport, when Mr. Kurian came and spoke to him, because a few things that he looked at was the opportunity, the exports that's happening. We were taking our cargo all the way to Trivandrum at that time. So small things, but he felt, there is a need for an airport in Cochin, which is bigger, so that, there would be bigger planes coming here, we being able to export cargo from here. And he just went behind it. And I don't know, many people know how much of time he spent for the airport.
I know, that is why I specifically mentioned the airport.
Right. So he was not just a director there. I would say he would work shoulder to shoulder with Kurian during those days to make sure that that is the kind of commitment. Even the medical mission, when we moved from the hospital, moved from a hospital to a medical college, the time that he used to spend. And I mean, he started a spice business, but his passion was always construction. And, he wanted to make sure there's something happening with construction somewhere in the organization or somewhere that he's connected. So that's what he was.
That is where Ashok would have had a problem because, with probably spending more, no construction for him other than
right. No buildings coming up, money being spent, so that's what CBJ is.
Yeah. On the values, can you just tell the organizational values which all of you all follow and how much of it came from CB Jacob and George Paul and others later on?
See, when in 72, when a company based out of India starting that to a product line that's going into food, your quality commitment had to be very high. Your commitment in terms of being very transparent in what you're doing was very important, because I don't think those days a foreign company would trust an Indian company. So I recall, and the kind of involvement and commitment that he had for the business. And the other aspect was, like you mentioned, about people were not happy to invest in Kerala. The other thing that he did was he made sure that we were employing more. I mean, when we looked at talent, he looked at talent that's locals, because one of his concepts was, if we develop something here, people around us start to grow because of that investment, then naturally people would be nearby, would be connected to him. The other thing was that earlier on we used to have, after 3 or 4 years of working with the organization, interest-free loan was given for people to build homes. So that way, that person, not just that person, but his family also got connected to the organization. So the loyal employees, I mean, I don't think we had the brightest minds, but the loyalty and the commitment to work was significant. That he managed through these processes, and we still continue to do that. We had a small slip up in between, but otherwise, we've been very consistent with how we took care of the employees, our customers, and like this famous quote that he's made, saying that it's hard work and commitment, and rest is left to God. That success comes eventually. Yeah.
Where all do you all have factories today?
We have
what I would say the parent factory is Kolancheri, correct?
Kolancheri, and then we have 6 operations in India, and 1 in China and 1 in Vietnam. And 6 of them, one is, as you mentioned, we have 2 locations in Kolancheri itself. Then we have 1 in Coimbatore, 1 in Andhra in Ongole, and in Harihar in Karnataka.
Actually, one of the important things from what you just said, which I think everyone should listen to, is that in 1971-72, there was a startup which used Indian technology. All right, this reminds me of one of our senior charter members, Balagopal, Thermopenpol, where he started his blood bag manufacturing unit using Indian technology. So there are Indian labs, and it is not that everything has to come from outside. I think this is something, and of course, I've heard about the way he worked with the local communities, getting them employed, and the kind of facilities which were brought in there, etc. Going to Paolo, your business, like you said, is in a way you're a captive, okay? But do you have the flexibility to go and source where you find the best product at the back? Are you given that flexibility to buy where you think it is value for money for your company? But I'm looking at your company being separate from Synthite. Synthite, of course, is the parent company. I know you will have all your transfer pricing and things like that, which will be there because the ownership would be similar. But that kind of, suppose you find that, I will never say that quality of something which comes out of Synthite will not be up to the mark that you want, because I've always heard about the quality of the products which have come out. But suppose you find the pricing is too much. You want to get something else from somewhere. How does that work?
Great question. Something that we've really experienced. This was maybe 5 years ago. Till then, it was nearly 30% of our raw material purchases are from Synthite, because most of the products that we use in our formulations and in our products are spices and derived from that. So till about 5 years ago, we used to only source from Synthite to the extent where we never used to even, we didn't even shop or look elsewhere. The procurement job was quite a good job till that period. But then I think what happened, and it's not about quality, it's about the fact that there are some commodities where we don't have the the strength it's not it's a short-term challenge, because what happens in the agri space is the time you buy, the stock that you have, all that impacts the price of the product that's coming out from the from whichever factory or from whichever company. So there were times about 5 years ago when we were actually being outpriced in the market. Our competitors were outpricing us because they had the freedom to choose and buy from anybody. So then we had this dilemma. We had to go to our parent company and tell them that, you know what, we're not being competitive. We are not able to deliver on our results because you're not giving us products at the right price. I smile now because it was not easy at all. It was pretty challenging because obviously I can understand for people who are running the business, it's obviously extremely difficult. It's a sizable chunk of business as well. As I said, 30% of our raw material cost. But in hindsight, I think a very, a very logical and rational decision was taken. And the decision was we need a right of first refusal. So today, what we follow, and that's the decision that was taken maybe 4 to 5 years ago, is that whenever we are facing a challenge for a particular raw material, pepper, for example, if you're able to get a competing price from the marketplace, we have to we offer that price.
Good.
So Synthite has the right of first refusal. And I must admit, today they don't all our raw materials are not sourced from Synthite. There are some cases where Synthite simply can't compete, but it's a minority of the time, I can assure you.
Ashok, same question, except that here, you know, a lot of your raw material, and I think the raw material with Synthite, the parent company needs is going to be similar. All right. Are you able to leverage your volumes because of the Synthite brand to say, okay, you give it at that price, so I also need, are you able to leverage that? Do you do that? Is it done? Is procurement done as a group activity?
Yeah, so procurement is not necessarily done as a group activity. I think it's something that as a group we should be focusing on and, you know, getting into sooner than later. But the advantage we had from day one is the kind of you know, information that was available within the Synthite system, right? You know, access to suppliers, access to markets, and then eventually the name, right? I mean, what are the challenges some of the smaller players are facing in the market? You know, you go buy material from the market, it arrives in your warehouse. The material might be different, but being a small player, you don't even have the right to reject it. Have we used the Synthite brand name to our benefit there? Absolutely, right? So I mean, we go about saying we are Synthite and we buy materials. You have those advantages. So access to market has been the most biggest advantage for us with the Synthite brand name itself.
Okay, you know, for those who are on the call, I mean, you can start asking questions because I'm going to start taking up the questions which have come up in the chat box. We have a few questions. And I'm going to start with a question from MSA Kumar. A case of family growing faster than the business. 16 third generation members with 8 in business and 4 in leadership of businesses. In the recent TVS model, does Synthite have plans to link ownership with management? Does this make sense?
Is that for me? I mean, I'll take that call.
Yeah, Aju, I think you should probably respond to that.
All right. So, yeah. I mean, I've read about what TVS has done recently and also Murugappa has done recently in terms of having the ownership as one aspect and also everybody has the collective ownership. At the same time, the businesses are run separately because business, you know, people who have been leadership focus on their businesses. I think we are too small to consider anything like that. We are pretty happy with what we are currently doing. And I mentioned where there is we also set expectations. That's why we thought, you know, we should limit the rest of the 8, not really. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody is wanting to come into the business, but then we don't want at least any further additions at this point because as MSA rightly mentioned, the family has grown bigger than the business in terms of number of people who are there. But again, we see a lot more opportunities coming our way. We are venturing into, there's a lot of new product development that's happening, which can scale into independent businesses. So that's probably when we would have members come in. We haven't thought about a structure that TVS or Murugappa has looked at this point.
Okay. I'm going to give this question to Ashok, who I think is the youngest in the group, I presume. Is that how do you screen the next generation? And then is there an age, seniority criteria? Or is it purely meritocracy? How do you do that when somebody comes in? How is it that a member of the family gets into the business?
So I would say, I think purely because Paolo and me started off very early on, right? I mean, as Mr. Aju rightly pointed out, a lot of the structures came much after us. We possibly had the benefit of being there at the right time. But at that
Now,
point,
how is it happening now?
So
Let's say in the
right
last
now,
couple of years,
Yeah.
last couple of years, if somebody had to come into the business, what would you look at? Who decides? How is it decided?
So the structure is very merit-based right now. I mean, because your family, you do have access to the platform, right? I mean, you get the ability to get in, but then you go through the whole learning structure that you go through for the 2-year window, and then you kind of get to decide which then becomes your specialization area. But I would say the board, to a large extent, is tightened up, which is good, right? I mean, then the individual then gets evaluated surely on merit, and then kind of moves forward from there.
Paolo, this is for you. I'm just dividing the questions as they come in. But are there separate KPI matrices for the family members' performance? Is there a rewarding mechanism for outstanding performance, which is based on the kind of KPIs that are done? I'm going to ask Paolo to respond to that, and then I'm going to get to Aju on something with regard to a scoreboard or something like that. Paolo?
I think I mean, the board has a very systematic approach towards rating businesses. It is not specifically with regard to family or professional. If you are responsible for leading a business, you have your KPIs which are set, which is discussed and set at the beginning of the year. We have multiple reviews during the course of the year where we are expected to come and make presentations to the board. What we do is to ensure that the next generation is also active and aware of what's happening. While they're not invited into the boardroom for regular discussions, these reviews, whether it's a professional or a family member is presenting, they are invited. So therefore, there is that inclusion that happens where they understand the challenges that different business owners are facing, whether it's family or whether it's professional. In terms of the rewarding mechanism, I think the family members, we are a bit more liberal when it comes to family members, when it comes to remuneration and things of that nature. But I still think largely it is a meritocracy. I think there is a lot of thought and care and concern being put into setting these because, as an organization, we are very sensitive to the fact that the business has to be successful. Right. For all this to take shape.
Okay, Aju?
Yeah, the only people
who are not
the only people who are not evaluated at Synthite is we directors. Okay, everybody else is on the same board. So they are actually evaluated based like Paolo mentioned or Ashok mentioned. The evaluation is the same. The KPIs are fixed as a professionalist because we also believe that for the business to go forward, it has to be a combination of family and professionals together. So if we sort of close up all opportunities for professionals, we are not going to get good talent. Specifically, I mean, one of the mistakes that we did was also that we didn't get one of our family members to become a flavorist or a perfumist. That is something that we should have, long done that. But those skills we have to hire. Also, there are many other senior positions that are held by professionals. So all of them are evaluated very on the same metrics. And also rewards, as Paolo mentioned, we have a slight flexibility on the family members and at various levels. Now, the other 4 members who are at various levels within the organization, they are compared with a equal professional, maybe 10-15% more on remuneration, but all other mechanisms are the same.
This is actually a question probably from a startup. Where they're talking is is there a term fixed for those who are in the leadership positions? And from a startup point of view, can 3 co-founders of a startup practice a system of rotational leadership? Do you have rotational leadership, or it is that yes, you get to that position, then you are there, and how does that work? Is there a term for every position? How does your system work?
At the moment, the Blue Book or our constitution, when we structured that in 2012, as I mentioned earlier, my dad, who was the chairman and managing director, moved to the chairman's position. Then George Paul, he was close to 65 at that time. So for him, the retirement age was moved to 70 because he was already there. And then he was in leadership for 3.5 years. And then my brother took over. Again, George Paul would in a year or two, George Paul was retiring, expected to retire. And then Viju came in. He has a 5-year term. And then, of course, the term has to change. We haven't decided yet on who takes the leadership mantle, but then that leadership changes. But I think it's not a great idea for, like, depending on the skills. So how, when a startup gets together and starts to start a business, like if you look at Infosys, when they started out, the co-founders, all of them wanted to take a top job, and at some point it didn't work. So for that reason, I think the skill should be based on merit, that the leadership position.
Merit and competencies which take a person to that position. In fact, just to respond to that question, I don't think if 3 co-founders are coming in, you should say that each of you have your strengths. And I think you should work on those strengths. And this for the startups who are listening. Don't say that, okay, I'm going to be MD for the next 2 years, then you be. No, it has to be a collective leadership that you do. And at some point of time, if you find that you don't have the capability for that position because your company is growing, you need to nicely move away and continue on the board and let others take that on, is what I would say.
I can just add one thing to there, GK, is that, like, even when we looked at the 5, I mean, logically, I would have, gone for that position, but then we had a huge growth plan. If I thought, and that if I don't have the competence to run the business, a profession should come. That's why we didn't have the, like, when Viju is being replaced after 5 years term, then we thought, in case I didn't want to put any name there, or we didn't want to put any name there, because depending on the state of the business, we had to decide.
Now, there's another very famous blue book in this country. You know that? Actually, the Prime Minister's security with the Special Protection Group follows a blue book.
Okay.
And that is something which is a very, very tough thing, because I remember when Narasimha Rao came for the Technopark inauguration, he wanted me to go with him to the Rajbahar and said, tell him to get into this car. And when I went there, the person sitting at the back said, no, as per the blue book, he can't come in. And then the person who took me said, I don't care what he said. PM said he has to get into the car. I got him. Then I asked him what the blue book was. So he was explaining what it was.
Okay.
So the blue book is what the PM security is. This is a question from Sunil Gupta. Looking at the current businesses, all the entities are in AG business and are integrated. What happens if the younger generation comes up with a different business, say IT, whether the family constitution is open for that?
At the moment, not, because we, again, around the time 2012-13, we had already diversified into realty and hospitality. And we thought that was too much on the plate, because there's so much of opportunity in the food, the natural products and food and wellness space that we were already in, and that was growing. So we decided at the time, not to diversify into anything that's non-core. We had several discussions on creating a fund, so that any of the family member who's an entrepreneur want to do something different to support, but we haven't got to doing that yet. But eventually that should happen. That's definitely something that this family should adopt at some point.
This is from Anandamani, and I would say any of you can take this on. How do you all prepare yourselves before performances? Before the performance? I didn't understand the question. How do you all prepare yourself before performances? Is there a routine for you? I'm not quite sure whether Anandamani, I don't know. I hope it was not meant for somewhere where there's some dance or something being discussed, but he's probably looking at preparing yourself to get into a position. Okay. Is there some preparation that the family does? Do you have an induction program for family members separately from what you regularly do within an organization, within the organization? Who wants to take it? Aju or Ashok or Paolo, anyone?
As I mentioned, if I could take it, then as I mentioned earlier, like now a family member coming in, the first 1 year, he works in various parts of the business.
Okay.
Then in the second year, he goes to work with one of the outstation managers, one of the outstation companies, where he works under the chief manager as a shadow, so that he gets a lot of general management inputs running a business. Okay. So these 2 years he spends being trained. And then depending on what his education was or what he found that he could work within the organization, if there's an opportunity in that space, then he gets on to that role. So that's a structure that we have for the third generation.
We have about 8 minutes more. So I'm going to ask each of you, in a way, I would say both Paolo and Ashok Mani, you were startups. You started a new business. You didn't need to worry about the funding. There was some thought, there was a group to support you. But what would be the advice that you would give to the people who are, both Paolo and Ashok, for those who are looking at starting up their businesses today? What are the 2 or 3 things that they should very carefully look at? Because you've started new businesses. So what are the 2 or 3 things that they should clearly look at when they start their businesses?
Shall I go first?
Yeah,
I
please,
think
Paolo.
I think the first thing to do is to know that whatever you plan, assume that you will only reach 70%. So therefore, you have to really aim high. I think life doesn't work on an Excel spreadsheet. So while you can plot your numbers and get to a certain level, I think everything costs more, and sales is usually the other way around. You tend to get sales lesser than what you anticipate. So I think you've got to be very robust to be able to weather the initial storms, and there will be storms in the initial days. So the real test is how you perform on your worst day would dictate your ability to weather the storm. So I think you need to be very resilient, very strong, because businesses are challenging. So just just planning for your good day, it may not be enough. The second is to definitely invest in a team. I think it's virtually impossible today to do it all by yourself. I think it's actually foolish to do it by yourself, because you would end up taking on all the stress, all the load on yourself, and you're not. And it's always peer learning that makes a difference. And I would say the third thing is to start with an idea which excites you and which is different. There has to be an answer to what you're doing should answer the question, so what? Whatever you're doing, you say that, whether you're in IT, whether you're in food, whether you're in the creative space, once you define what you're saying, if somebody asks you, so what? And if you don't have a compelling enough answer, then I think it would be a challenge. But if you have a compelling answer, then I would say go for it.
Ashok?
Yeah, I would say point 1 for me would be spade work, right? Today you see a lot of people getting into the spaces very quickly, but what possibly helped me, and I would say it didn't help a lot because I didn't have 5 years of experience getting into it, but the spade work before getting into FMCG, even though it was maybe a year old, it did give a lot of experience, right? So I possibly had the freedom to do that. I do realize a lot of the startups might not have that. But if you have the ability at the time to kind of put in a lot of spade work before you get in, understand about the category or the product that you're getting into, spend some quality time on it, get market information. We got that because we were actually researching about doing an M&A, right? So I guess it gave tons of information. So I think it's very important that you look at the space before. Point 2 and 3, very similar to what I think Paolo was mentioning as well. I would say, thinking back, I'd be very happy to have a co-founder along, right? I mean, when you're at the top, it's pretty lonely. So if you had someone to share the load, then that'd be a big help. So always see if you can find someone who's having the same spirit as you to run the show along with you. And then point 3 is being very committed to it, right? I mean, don't start it. I guess the word startup is so frequently used today. I guess people just want to go out there and do it, but which is totally fine. But get into it and get into a space where you're totally committed to and it excites you, right? I mean, today I would say, I'm not even sure if I'd ever want to go back into the B2B business, right? I'm very excited about what I'm doing right now. I possibly do this for another 20 years. So I guess that kind of aspiration and excitement for the space you're in is very important.
Anju, I want you to tell, this is mainly for those who have started businesses, they're preparing for the next generation to move into their businesses today. Can you tell me 3 do's and 3 don'ts? 3 things that they must do as they plan for the next generation to come in, and 3 things that they should not do as they plan for the next generation to take over the business.
See, you should be very clear whether you want the family in the business. That has to be very clear because that's very important. And once you take the decision to have them, especially with the current generation, don't try to mentor them too much. because that's not the spirit the current generation has. So giving them a lot of freedom is very, very important. And again, treat them as professionals once you do that, because they expect you to do that. So these are the three things that you should be very, very clear about, because, just because it's your nephew or your son, don't expect them to exactly. I mean, we did that when our dad wanted us to do what he expected, we did it, but that's our generation. But going forward, that's not expected. So these are three things. I mean, in general, there are do's and do nots in the same answer that I gave. It's very, very important to have those three things taken care of. Otherwise, that you can be in for a lot of disappointments. It's an everyday challenge otherwise. So once you've got somebody in, give them a certain rein. I mean, I would compare this to riding a horse. Once you're a horse and you're the reins, you've got to know how to control it enough so that the horse can perform. You could keep on tightening it, and then the horse is not going to perform. So you have to let go and make them work the way they want to some extent, so that you get the best out of them.
Okay, I know it's difficult to answer this in 1 minute, but there's a question which came up in terms of how do you, and maybe Ashok should answer because he touched on it. What is the process of proper research on a topic that you do? What are your methods of collecting data, which is genuine and valuable? One thing which I will say before you say, please don't depend on Google for collecting data. You need to go through very reliable sources. But Ashok, take over, yeah.
Sure. I guess one of the challenges,
because we just have another 2 minutes. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So the challenge with reliable data today is expensive, right? I mean, you do have to go through, the right consultants, spend, good quality of time, effort, money in it. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's worth it, right? I mean, before you plunge lakhs or crores or whatever you're deciding to plunge it into, it's very important that you get reliable data from very reliable sources, and consulting is one good space to it. I would also say spend your own quality time, right? I mean, can you, for me, when we got into retail, I would say I did possibly a 250 retail visit in a week's time to kind of get an understanding of, what was actually happening out there. So first-hand information, right? So first-hand information and consulting are two things I would say would be the right way to go.
Good. Thank you very much. I mean, we've had a great panel, 2 generations, an excellent track record, a great company. And all the best for the way you go forward. There are a lot of learnings from what Synthite as a group have done. One of the things is, of course, the kind of CSR work. And I want to touch on that, but there were too many questions to really cover that. There's a lot of giving back to society, which you all do. So thank you very much for being on the panel. I thank Ajit, Hari, and others for inviting me to moderate this session with this great family here. Thank you, Revati, for the initial introductions. And thank you very much. We get into the last session of the day, which is the valedictory session for TiCon 2020. The first time it is virtual. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Aju, Paolo, and Ashok Mani. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.